Hey everyone, Noah Zerby here. This is one of a series of videos looking at the key institutional actors in American foreign policy. This video looks at the role of the president, the chief executive in the US government. In other videos, we look at the role of Congress and the bureaucracy. But if you're ready, let's discuss the role of the president. In his preface to Ted Sorensen's 1963 book, Decision Making in the White House, then President John Kennedy commented that the American presidency is a formidable, exposed, and somewhat mysterious institution. It is formidable because it represents the point of ultimate decision in the American political system. It is exposed because decisions cannot take place in a vacuum. The presidency is the center of the play of pressure, interest, and idea in the nation. And the presidential office is the vortex into which all of the elements of a national decision are irresistibly drawn. And it is mysterious because the essence of ultimate decision remains impenetrable to the observer, often indeed to the decider himself. Then Kennedy went on to say that the president is rightly described as a man of extraordinary powers, yet it is also true that he must wield those powers under extraordinary limitations. The point he was making is important. We often view the president as being powerful, indeed the most powerful actor in foreign policy, but that power is subject to a number of limits, and so in this video we're going to explore both those powers and the limits placed on them. When we think of the powers of the presidency, particularly in the arena of foreign policy, we can start by thinking about the constitutionally prescribed roles of the president. These powers originate in Article 2 of the Constitution, though they've evolved through amendments, legislation, judicial decisions and interpretation, and changes in customs over time. These powers include the power of the president as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. Although the Constitution checks this power by, for example, granting Congress the power to declare war, raise, and fund armies, presidential power as commander-in-chief has, particularly since the end of World War II, been a central point for presidential control of foreign policy. The president also serves as the chief diplomat or the chief negotiator on behalf of the United States. This power also includes the ability to send and receive ambassadors, to negotiate treaties, to offer or withdraw diplomatic recognition of other countries, and to develop executive agreements. While the power is often delegated to the Secretary of State or to other ambassadors, it's nevertheless an important source of presidential authority. As the head of an expansive federal bureaucracy, the president also serves as the chief administrator, overseeing the work of numerous federal departments, agencies, corporations, and others that comprise the federal government. Under the U.S. system, the president serves as both the administrative head of government and the ceremonial head of state. The position thus fuses roles that are often divided in other countries. For example, in the United Kingdom, the ceremonial head of state is the Queen, while the administrative head of government is the Prime Minister. In the United States, those powers are fused into the presidency. The president often serves as the chief legislator, at least in a de facto capacity. Much of the legislation that's passed by Congress originates in the executive branch. For example, the federal budget is generally drafted by the Office of Management and Budget and includes a variety of items, including foreign aid and military budgets. And finally, the president, along with the vice president, are the only officials in the United States who are elected by the people nationwide rather than by specific states or House districts. Even though their elections are mediated by the Electoral College, the president can nevertheless often claim to speak for the American people as a whole. But as presidents quickly find out, presidential power in foreign policy is limited in several important ways as well. Early in their administrations, presidents often realize that they don't have enough time to complete all the necessary tasks to govern. They must choose which items they'll make priorities for themselves, which items they'll delegate to their cabinet leadership and bureaucracy, and which items they simply have to ignore or forego. Interestingly, the time pressure has increased in recent years as the honeymoon period afforded new presidents has shortened and the willingness of Congress to follow the president's lead has waned. Presidents must also rely on their advisors for information. Ironically, this can create a twofold problem. Information is scarce, that is, presidents often have to make decisions with little to no information or information that's provided too late. At the same time, information is also overabundant, that is, presidents have too much and often contradictory information to deal with on an issue, sometimes creating a situation of information paralysis. Both too much and too little information can undermine presidential effectiveness in foreign policy decision-making. Presidential power can also sometimes be limited by an entrenched and unresponsive bureaucracy. This is not to say that there's some deep state actively trying to thwart presidential authority. Rather, bureaucracies tend to operate according to standard operating procedures, making decisions based on momentum and historical precedent. This works well under stable situations, but can create obstacles and barriers to change that can slow down quick decision making, particularly in times of crisis. The other branches of the federal government, Congress and the courts, can also often seek to limit presidential autonomy. Presidents sometimes find their policies thwarted by court decisions and sometimes by congressional action, particularly when different parties control the White House and the Congress. State and local governments sometimes pursue their own foreign policy objectives. Particularly over the past decade or so, state and local governments have become increasingly autonomous foreign policy actors. Governors of a number of Western states pursued climate change negotiations with other countries after President Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, and even when they're not pursuing their own autonomous foreign policies, states and municipalities can often operate as independent economic actors on the global stage, pursuing their own objectives. Interest groups and social movements can also seek to exercise influence in foreign policy decisions or to limit presidential autonomy. This is particularly true in areas where small groups are well organized. Examples of this might include trade groups seeking particular economic policies, or ethnic nationals trying to influence foreign policies towards their ethnic kin. Presidents sometimes also feel constrained by the media and public opinion. Research shows that presidential autonomy increases when issues are not in the national spotlight. By contrast, when issues receive considerable media attention, pressure increases on presidents to take action. Historically, public opinion has been less focused on international issues, and it has instead tended to concentrate on domestic political concerns. That said, presidents were often keenly aware, as John Kennedy once observed, that foreign policy can lose elections. And finally, presidential autonomy may be constrained by broader global and historical forces outside the United States. That is, to borrow Karl Marx's famous adage, the idea that we make our own history, but not under conditions of our own choosing. If we think of foreign policy areas as existing along a spectrum, with domestic issues at one end and international or global issues at the other, then we can conclude that presidential power is greatest in foreign affairs and national security issues, and faces the greatest limitations or has the greatest number of competing centers of power at the domestic level. Congress and the courts are more interested in domestic questions in general, and the media and public opinion frequently focuses there as well. As a result, presidents often find their power more limited at the domestic level. But in the post-Cold War era, a number of issues operate at an intermediate or so-called intermestic level. That is, they connect the domestic and international. Issues like trade, immigration, and environment are simultaneously domestic and international issues. Such issues limit presidential decision-making autonomy as the number of actors interested in those questions tends to increase. The other issue that impacts presidential power in foreign policy centers on the presidential life cycle. Presidents are at their most powerful immediately after entering office. Presidents often benefit from a honeymoon period where they enjoy higher degrees of popular support than is the case later in their terms. And they often could claim an election mandate having just won the vote. But every day that ticks by after that, presidents seem to lose a little bit of influence. This is why administrations so frequently set ambitious agendas for the first 100 days in office. This notion was described by President Johnson in an interview shortly after his election in 1964. He said that when you win big, you can have anything you want for a time. You come home with that big landslide, and there isn't one of them in Congress who will stand in your way. No, they'll be glad to be aboard and to have their photograph taken with you and to be part of that victory. They'll come along, they'll give you almost anything you want for a while, and then they'll turn on you. They always do. They'll lay in waiting for you to come along and slip up, and you will. They'll give you almost everything, and they'll make you pay them back for it. They'll get tired of all those columnists writing how smart you are and how weak they are, and the pendulum will swing back. President Obama expressed a similar sentiment more succinctly when he told congressional Republicans in 2009 that elections have consequences, and I won. Presidential approval ratings, at least historically, seem to confirm this trend. This graphic, taken from the 538.com website, shows that most presidents come into power near the peak of their approval ratings, only to see those popular approval ratings gradually decline over time. There were a couple of exceptions to this. Reagan's popularity proved relatively consistent over time, and so was President Obama's. And although not reflected on this graphic, President Trump's popularity was incredibly consistent, with his job approval rating floating within a very narrow range throughout his entire presidency. This in part reflected the increasingly polarized nature of American politics. Trump maintained the widest gap in approval between Republicans and Democrats of any president in history, although Obama was a close second, suggesting that this polarization is likely a recurrent feature in American politics. Trump's approval rating fluctuated from a high of 45% at his inauguration and again around April 2000 to a low of about 37% in August and December of 2017, and again after the January 6th riots. All of this simultaneously demonstrates the impact of the honeymoon period of presidential approval, but also illustrates its declining importance in contemporary politics. The other important point to note about presidential approval ratings focuses on the rally around the flag effect of crises. Note the sharp approval ratings for President George H.W. Bush in 1991 and the sharp approval rating increase for President George W. Bush in 2001. What happened there? In both cases, the country was brought to war. In the first instance, the United States launched Operation Desert Storm, leading an international effort to force the withdrawal of Iraq from Kuwait. And in the second case, in 2001, the United States was attacked by al-Qaeda on September 11th, leading to the launch of Operation Enduring Freedom and the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. In both cases, the presidents saw their approval rating shoot sharply upward before falling back down to pre-war levels. So that concludes our brief overview of the role of the president in foreign policy decision-making. Be sure to watch the other videos in this series and leave any questions you have in the comment section below. Thanks everyone, have a good day.